Thank you, Joan. I am sharing screen. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, excellent. So thank you. My name is Liz Gershoff. I am a professor at the University of Texas in the United States. I have studied the effects of corporal punishment on children for the past 20 years, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the research. Several decades of research have shown that corporal punishment does not improve children's behavior. Instead, dozens of studies have shown that corporal punishment predicts more mental health problems and worse child behavior over time. Today, I will focus my remarks on 4 key insights from recent cutting-edge research on corporal punishment. Insight number 1, corporal punishment is an adverse childhood experience. Research on adverse childhood experiences, known as ACEs, has shown that difficult and sometimes traumatic experiences early in life can affect health and well-being for many years, including into adulthood. Several recent studies have also demonstrated that corporal punishment predicts negative health outcomes in adulthood in the same ways as the 10 ACEs from the original study. The original ACEs study asked participants whether they had been corporally punished in childhood. My colleagues and I analyzed this data and found that corporal punishment in childhood was a consistent predictor of worse mental health in adulthood. As you see here, corporal punishment predicted whether individuals had used illegal drugs, drank high amounts of alcohol, or ever attempted suicide. Many ACEs did not predict these outcomes. They are shown at the bottom in italics. Corporal punishment predicted all 3 indicators of poor mental health. The only other ACE that also predicted all 3 of these outcomes was a history of sexual abuse. It is clear that corporal punishment should be considered an ACE. Insight number 2, corporal punishment is linked with worse outcomes for children. I guess things in Texas are not always ready to go. So I will pick up with where I left off, which is this insight number 2 about corporal punishment being linked with the worst outcomes for children across countries and cultures. And so a concern about the research on corporal punishment has been that it has focused on research in the US and other high-income countries, and thus is not relevant to families in low and middle-income countries. However, we now have research from countries around the world, including low and middle income countries. This research also finds that corporal punishment is linked with worse outcomes for children. One reason to worry about the impacts of corporal punishment on children is the fact that millions of children experience corporal punishment each year. This map shows the percentage of children in each country who have experienced corporal punishment according to UNICEF's multiple indicator cluster surveys known as MICS. Darker red colors indicate a higher percentage of children is corporally punished by their parents. Corporal punishment of children remains widespread around the world. But is corporal punishment related to negative child outcomes in these countries? Colleagues of mine at the University of Michigan looked within 62 low and middle income countries in the MICS study to identify whether corporal punishment predicted better social emotional behavior in children, such as getting along with other children. They examined the data from over 200,000 children. Now, in this graph, any countries where corporal punishment promotes better child behavior will appear as a black dot on the right-hand side. Countries where corporal punishment is associated with worse child behavior will appear as a black dot on the left side. Let's see what they found. In looking at the right side, there are no countries where corporal punishment is linked with better social emotional behavior in children. When we look at the left side, we see that in 60 countries, the more children are corporally punished, the worse their social emotional behavior. In the 2 countries at the top whose confidence intervals cross the 0 line in the middle, namely Chad and Ukraine, there is no significant relationship. This graph makes clear that in the vast majority of countries, corporal punishment predicts worse social emotional behavior in children. My colleagues and I did an in-depth study in a specific middle-income country, namely Colombia, and found that children exposed to corporal punishment very early in life exhibited significantly slower cognitive development over time compared to children who had not been corporally punished. This was true after taking into account several factors about the children, including their initial cognitive scores, their families, including family wealth and parent involvement, and their communities, such as levels of violence. And after using several econometric methods to increase our confidence that the associations were causal in nature. Another UNICEF-sponsored study, the Young Lives study, looked at corporal punishment in schools in 4 countries: Ethiopia, India, Peru, and Vietnam. The study addressed the question, does corporal punishment in schools promote children's learning over time? The answer, no. What we find in these countries is that corporal punishment predicted worse behavior or worse performance on tests of math skills in 3 of the countries. In India, it also predicted worse scores on tests of verbal skills. This study clearly shows that corporal punishment in schools does not promote learning. Insight number 3, shared genes do not explain links between parents' use of corporal punishment and children's aggressive behavior. One question about the research to date is whether the observed associations are genetic. It may be that aggressive parents both hit their children as corporal punishment and pass on those aggressive genes to their children. If that were true, then corporal punishment would not be viewed as a cause of child aggression. My colleagues and I used a sample of twins in the US to determine if the links between corporal punishment and aggression were stronger for identical twins who share 100% of their genes than for non-identical twins who share 50% of their genes. That would suggest a genetic effect. However, we found no evidence of a genetic effect. Corporal punishment was associated with child aggression equally for identical and non-identical twins. Thus, shared genes cannot explain why children who are corporally punished are more aggressive. These results point to an environmental or nurture explanation, not a genetic or nature explanation. Insight number 4, corporal punishment affects children's brain functioning. There have been a few studies to date that have identified differences in brain structure and functioning that can be attributed to corporal punishment. The most recent study examined brain scans of children who had been corporally punished and compared them with children who had not. They found that the brains of the children in the 2 groups reacted differently to signs of threat. The brains of children who had been corporally punished were more reactive. The red and yellow shading on this graph indicates the regions of the brain where corporally punished children had heightened response to threat. This study provides initial evidence that early experiences of corporal punishment change how the brain functions and make children hypervigilant to situations in which they perceive danger, such as a risk of being hit. These highlighted regions are also involved in emotion regulation and in processing social information. Thus, these results suggest that corporal punishment may affect emotion regulation and the ability to interact appropriately with others. In sum, there is no evidence that corporal punishment is effective in promoting positive child behavior. The vast majority of evidence shows that corporal punishment is harmful to children. This accumulation of research provides clear support for prohibition on corporal punishment as a means of protecting children and promoting their well-being. Please feel free to contact me with any questions or if you would like a copy of this presentation or the research papers I discussed. Thank you so much.